What are your thoughts on a leftist Muslim alliance?
The Muslim community, it might align with Jeremy Corbyn on a number of issues, but it might not align on a number of other issues. I would definitely say, conservatives need to be shown some love. Labour actually making very sensible noises. I think for them, it probably is, let's punish the Muslim community. 25, 30, 40 seats where the Muslim community can have a real impact. A number of major scholars and very prominent scholars got behind and said, look, we need to be voting, we need to be politically active, even if you look in the Quran.
Cool. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My name is Salsabil Haj Sharif and I am the London Regional Manager at MEND, and I'm here today with Ibrahim Khan. Ibrahim Khan is a expert at Islamic finance. He graduated from Oxford University in politics, philosophy and economics. He also graduated with his Alamiya from As-Salam Institute. And you're the founder of Islamic Finance Guru and Curate Capital, right?
That's right. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome, and it's very, very lovely to have you here. How are you? How is your day?
Yeah, not bad at all. Not bad at all. I'm really excited to be part of this because I feel like us as a community, as a Muslim community, often we're not as engaged on the political side, and we're not having hopefully important conversations. I don't know if this is going to be a particularly enlightening one, but we'll try our best and start opening those questions.
Inshallah. So, speaking of Muslim political engagement, we've had a very, very interesting summer with the elections and TMV being this new and exciting campaign that ran and was for the most part quite successful, with 5 independents ending up in Parliament. Could you tell us a bit more about the start of TMV, where the idea came from, how it started, and how it went along?
Yeah, so I think we've been sadly dulled by just the ferocity and the ongoing nature of the Israeli assault on not just Gaza now, but actually it seems like a lot of the Middle East.
Yeah.
But if you remember back to October, November, when this was all very fresh, the Muslim community felt very helpless because they didn't really seem to have any political home, because the Conservative Party, who was the power at the time, were staunchly behind Israel, and unfortunately the Labour Party were basically staunchly behind Israel as well.
Yeah.
And that led to a huge, rupture within the Muslim political fabric, where I think everyone realized that what had been happening over the last 20 years had basically not worked.
Yeah.
And the very little, frankly, that had been happening had basically not worked. And so we needed something different. And I think it took something like Gaza to get everyone mobilized. And the Muslim vote, I was one of many people like this, right, who were looking around to see, is there something that can represent us as a community that we can be part of? And the Muslim vote very, I think, naturally came out of this ferment. And I think it was the thing that made me very attracted to it, and wanted to be supportive of it and part of it, is the call towards unity and coordination, because I thought that was something that we'd historically lacked. Everyone had their little fiefdom, and they had the little pulpit and they spoke from it, but there wasn't anything that genuinely felt like it's fully representative of the community. And that's what very ambitiously the Muslim vote set out to achieve. And I think the moment for me that crystallized was when I was on this call where you had all of the old guard of the Muslim community. I don't know if you were on this call, but there's an old guard of the Muslim community on there, and then you had these new people, activists, and I guess people from the NGO space, and they were all on one call together.
Yeah.
And I think TMV's ability to get everyone, all these disparate people together on one platform, that was, I think, the thing that attracted me, and I think was the seed of ultimately what was, I think, quite a successful outcome.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the unity really came through, and people were willing to set aside the majority of their differences and come together for this, unified cause. And it was amazing. I think people were very, very excited. It was many people had seen the Muslim community be active in the political sphere in one given point in time. And so that actually brings us on to the next question. This was a moment, a unique and special moment, one that came about because there's a genocide happening. which is horrible and terrifying and incredibly tragic. But that's the reality of it. We came together for that reason. We came together because there was this sense of urgency and desperation for a political solution that the mainstream political parties weren't bringing to us. Do you think this can be replicated, given the urgency of the moment that led to the creation of the Muslim vote, that led to this unity, that led to this political engagement? It was desperate, it was urgent, it needed to happen immediately. And so alhamdulillah, many people were able to act on that and were able to come together. And we saw some success politically. Now, we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what's going to happen in Gaza. We don't know what's going to happen outside of that. We don't know how the Labour Party is going to play their cards in the next 5 years. So as a Muslim community trying to plan ahead, how do we replicate a successful political experience without being reactionary?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say that there was a point where I was doing some door knocking for the first time in my life, and there was an uncle who I came across, and he was very suspicious of in this particular constituency. He was an independent standing, and he said, "Look, it's a great idea, it's a great initiative, but independents never win.
Yeah.
And she'll be lucky. Leanne will be lucky to get maybe 500 seats, 500 votes." And ultimately, obviously, Leanne came within 500 votes of winning that particular seat as a whole. Mm-hmm. And so the naysayers have been there for the last 9 months as well.
Yeah.
The naysayers will always be there. Mm-hmm. So, even before Gaza, the same naysayers would be saying, well, Gaza is just one of the issues, and actually the Muslim community is so staunchly behind Labour that they will continue voting for Labour or the mainstream parties, and you're not going to be able to succeed, OTMV, with whatever strategy it is that you've set out. Mm. So I think that's the first thing to say, right? So that there's always people who doubt. The second thing to say is that in 5 years' time, politics is a febrile and live beast, and the only thing that one can do to try and navigate these choppy waters is to have a direction of travel, is to have good people on board, and to then hopefully, because you've got a direction of travel and a good people on board, have the ability to maneuver live this ship through these choppy waters. And exactly what's going to emerge in 4 or 5 years is actually unclear to everyone. But I think if we hold on to the core thing that I mentioned at the start, which is unity and coordination, and we just stick to that like glue, and are just plodding along nice and steadily, and being united and being coordinated, I actually think that people will be hugely surprised. I'll give you a really practical example. The same people who said, "Oh no, someone like Leanne can never win," or "Oh no, someone like Ajmal Masroor can never win," or so many different places where it was a very close, closely fought election. Those people will, in the next election, feel like, actually, you know what? I need to come out, because I can. This can actually happen. This happened last time. Mm-hmm. It can happen again. And you now have entire areas of the Muslim community, or the UK, who were not politically active, who didn't know how to canvass, who didn't know how to door knock, but now they do. And that is going to be something that the community incrementally builds on. So I think that, whatever the TMV, I guess, leadership team decides is, the future direction of travel in terms of who to be endorsing, I guess we can talk about that as well, is I think achievable.
Yeah. No, I agree. In terms of the massive underestimation, I can't lie. I was working with many campaigns, but I did have my doubts. I did have my questions specifically around the issue of independence. Independents don't typically win. It's a two-party system and designed to be that way for a reason. And so, I remember there was this conversation that was going around. It's like, no independent. I think it was one independent only has ever won, left of Labour, has won an election since 1945, since World War II. How can we get them as many as we were trying to get in? And that was another thing that I noticed. I think a lot of the left, I think, underestimated what the Muslim vote can do. And I think that's that's an interesting thing to explore and to think about if we're trying to form an alliance for the future. Now, there's a lot of talk around the formation of a new political party, Jeremy Corbyn looking to form a political party of his own. What are your thoughts on that? What are your thoughts on a leftist Muslim alliance, something similar to France, where there's a bloc that is formed and, the idea is to vote in that direction? What do you think of that?
Yeah, so I think as a community, we all united over a subject as emotive as Gaza. But I think as a community, especially as a community that is increasingly affluent, and there are now emerging pockets of the middle class within the British Muslim community, I don't think that it would be a sensible decision for the Muslim vote, or indeed the Muslim community at large, to say, okay, guys, we're all in behind the most left end of the Labour spectrum, which is what then ultimately got pushed out and has now become, I guess, this independent group. And I think that for two reasons. The first is because I don't think it's always reflective of the Muslim community's points of view. The second, and of course, the Muslim community, it might align with Jeremy Corbyn on a number of issues, but it might not align on a number of other issues, particularly on social values, where actually perhaps the Tories, there may be more alignment there, remarkably. And I'd say the second point is, just from a pragmatic perspective, as a community, I don't think it makes sense, given just the way that British politics is. You've got two mainstream parties, they pretty much always win, and they always have done for the last century, right, plus, actually centuries plus. And in that landscape, to then say that we are now going to back fully going to back, a new emergent party, I don't think that's particularly sensible. Now, I think what, TMB and, the Muslim community as a whole should be doing is engaging with all political parties, Labour, Conservative, Liberal Democrats, Greens, and the independent group. I think they should be engaging with all of them, because I don't think that, there is any benefit for us as a community to say that we're only aligned with one, and that's what we're going to do. Because the moment that you do that, you actually end the conversation with every other party, because the parties are hugely tribal, and so they don't like to engage with others. That's kind of how I think about it.
Okay. Speaking of tribalism and political parties, now Muslims have had massive amounts of loyalty towards Labour Party for a very long time. And the reasons for that have been valid. We say it like it was just tribalism, but actually for the most part, with, certain issues, of course, around the Iraq war, and a few others. Besides that, there have been good reasons to stick with the Labour Party, given its policies, its attitude towards minorities, its attitude towards immigration, and so on. Now, there's been a shift. There has been a shift. Gaza, especially in the genocide happening, has caused a massive shift. Not only that, but the Labour Party itself has changed massively. We saw in the Labour Party conference, them stating that quite clearly. This isn't, the 2019 party, and we are no longer a party of protest. And it seems as though they are trying to distance themselves from the politics that drew many of us to them in the first place. Now, what do you think of what's going to happen in the future? Do you think the divorce from the Labour Party is going to be permanent? Do you think it's just a temporary thing? Is there a way to get back on board with the party that is currently in power and will very likely be in power for a long time, given that the Conservatives look like they're shattered? What do we do, especially in light of the danger of reform? So we're looking at reform emerging, them actually getting seats in Parliament. We've got this emerging threat of the far right, and we've got, a left-wing, left-centre party that is now in power. How do we engage with it to ensure that Muslim rights are protected in the current climate?
Yeah, so let's unpack it in three ways. Let's look at what Labour actually is right now. Let's think about how the Muslim community should engage with that vis-a-vis what the Labour is right now. And then finally, let's think a little bit about how that's going to play out over the next 5 years.
Yeah.
So where Labour is right now, putting aside the the leftist tendencies that I might perhaps have in some ways, I actually think that as someone who runs an investment fund, I also very much get it from the other perspective as well. I think on the economic side, Labour are actually making very sensible noises by and large. Apart from there are certain things that they're cutting, child benefit caps, etc., that are problematic in my view. But I think by and large, the Labour government is making sensible noises when it comes to investing in infrastructure, investing in climate change, looking to have public-private partnerships. I think that's actually quite a sensible way of approaching some of the major issues that we've got as a country where we don't have any money. I think the NHS is broken. So I think, West Streeting is right on that. I think that, there's a whole bunch of things that they're getting right. And I know that sounds odd coming from, someone who is, pretty on the left spectrum. But I think where Labour are going to struggle is with the challenge of reform coming, and where they're also going to struggle is the fact that there's no money. So they might have some nice ideas, but to actually implement that, I think is going to be a real challenge. And I think they're going to be running straight into the old quagmire of civil service and bureaucracy, and the NHS being this white elephant that is actually really hard to change the course of very quickly. So I think that the actual wins that they will have, I'm not actually sure how quickly they'll be able to proceed. So how does a Muslim community deal with this? Oh, and by the way, I think the Labour Party, with respect to the Muslim community so far, have been pretty poor. They've not even engaged with the Muslim community.
Yes.
The MCB, they've not engaged with anyone from the Muslim community. And I think that's not necessarily because they are ideologically against the Muslim community. I think that they unfortunately are surrounded by perhaps the wrong advisors or the wrong people, where there's been regulatory capture or government or the headspace capture, which is ultimately actually going to be bad for Labour themselves. I think what they need to do is actually engage with the Muslim community.
Do you think it's punishment?
I don't think it's punishment necessarily. I think the people around the Labour leadership at the moment, who unfortunately are I think very anti-Muslim in some cases, not all of them, but I think for them it probably is let's punish the Muslim community for whatever stances that they have as a whole that we don't necessarily agree with. And so, but I don't think the Labour Party themselves, I think most of the politicians, actually, if you dig into their past, they've had actually quite pro-Palestinian positions, including Keir Starmer, including West Streeting, including Shabana Mahmood. All of these people have actually had very pro-Palestinian positions historically. So I don't think it's an ideological thing. I think it's a regulatory capture thing. And I think that's on the Labour Party to do the outreach and handle this, and we'll talk about how I think they should do that. But I think it's also on the Muslim community to make sure that we are setting ourselves up to actually, engage with and not be too, protesty as well. In all, if we've got the Muslim community here, we can't all be protest. I think there needs to be different factions and different hues and colours of that. We need to have the suffragettes and the suffragists so that, political parties can engage with us. I think the way the Labour Party should engage is as follows. So in 5 years' time, they could actually be very, very likely to be overthrown by the Tories. If you remember, 5 years ago, Boris Johnson came in with a huge majority. Yeah. It was unforeseeable that the Labour government would come in with a huge majority in this time around. Yeah. The reason is because our political landscape has become really divisive, and you have across the board in the UK this election, I think the real data point that no one really talked about is how the margins of the seats have come down to wafer thin margins, and And that means that in the next election, a whole bunch of seats are going to become marginals, because I think Reform is going to continue its inexorable rise, and the Conservative Party is going to go right, but it won't be able to go right enough for Reform. And so I think Reform are going to take a whole bunch of seats. So what the Labour Party needs to think about is, okay, so we've got the Reform issue where, we've got the red wall and that's going to potentially collapse. And we also have the Muslim community issue where there's about 25, 30, 40 seats where the Muslim community can have a real impact. How are we going to deal with that? What I think the Labour government should do is listen to the Muslim community and actually give them, and it's not even the Muslim community, it's, underprivileged, areas in inner city areas where the Muslim community is heavily, concentrated. Look after those areas. Those are Labour heartlands. It's not just Muslims, it's black, minority, ethnic, working class people. Look after them, right? And then once you do that, and front load that, because that probably isn't going to be popular with the traditional Tories and Reform voters. And actually, you should then make sure that you're looking after those same white working class areas where we see all of those riots. I don't think the way to appease or deal with this issue is by competing with the Tories and how racist you can be. I think the way to deal with it really is through love, right? Show them the love. Places like Blackpool and Redcar and Sunderland are nowhere near the economic outcomes that someone in London would have. So we need to show them that love, and that's how you heal this country. But unfortunately, what Labour is doing right now is they're going to end up marginalising its base even further, and that's going to, that could cripple it, and it's going to go hard right. It's going to go further right to try and combat Reform, and it's going to lose there as well. So it could actually lose its entire election if it does this, but I don't think it should, and I think there's a path where it doesn't do that as well.
Yeah, because no matter how right they go, they're not going to go as right as the Conservatives, and the Conservatives are willing to go further right. Would you say you'd see a Conservative Reform alliance or even a merging of the two political parties, just out of curiosity?
Possibly. I think the Conservatives are the more pragmatic and non-ideological of the two mainstream parties. So I think that could happen, but at the same time, political parties are very very kind of party focused, right? And they really don't like to support other political parties. So even when we saw the Lib Dem Tory alliance back in the early 2010s, that up till the point when the election had finished and the results were in, there was no indication that there would be an alliance. And so I don't think that there's going to be any official alliance. There might be back channel kind of conversations. But I don't think it's going to happen.
Interesting. Talking about the Muslim community building its capacity for politics and political education, after the election, we saw a number of by-elections, right? And there was quite a lot of excitement around them initially. It died down a little bit, but this opportunity, what the election represented, is an opportunity to overthrow a system that was no longer serving you, right? To make a statement and have it be bold. And so on different occasions, the Muslim community within sort of these local by-elections have chosen to support green candidates or independent candidates. We saw one in Hackney where it was an actual successful experiment where there was an alliance between the green candidates and the independent candidates. They came together, they stood together, and they actually won. They defeated the Labour Party in that area by forming this alliance. So however, generally speaking, when it comes to local elections, you don't get much engagement. No one really goes out to vote. And they're actually quite easy to win. If you got and we've had these discussions before, if you got 3-4 mosques motivated enough, and you got people, excited about the idea of voting, and you spoke to people locally, you got businesses on board and so on, you can do great things at a local level. And so many of the issues that Muslims have concerns with, like mosques, parking spaces, things to do with kids' education and so on, they're dealt with at a local level. People really overestimate what an MP can do. It's a lot of the prestige around it as opposed to, your practical things. How do you think TMV should deal with local elections, especially with these massively, massively low turnouts, and people in general, and the Muslim community in particular, not really taking an interest in participating in local elections or in local politics.
I think you're completely right. I think local elections are different to the national landscape, and I think that the heart of TMV, the other thing that attracted me to it is the empowerment of local communities, and not saying, all right, you guys over there who we don't know anything about, you're going to back this person. But actually, it's more like, we're going to listen and we're going to engage and we're going to hear from the community what they've decided, and then we will reflect that on our website. And I think that was quite important part of the success of the Muslim vote. I think that backing mainstream parties should be the way forward at the national level. I think at the local level, there's a lot more scope, because actually, at the local level, even if you back a Labour councillor or a Tory councillor, they all have their own very personal, there's no party whip in the same way that there is at the national level. And so they're actually very individualistic, so and having independents and Greens and whatever the case might be, I think is perfectly fine. Actually, it's more about the candidates and making sure that we are engaging with candidates who are supportive to the kind of causes and issues and values that we hold. And I think if we look at areas like Tower Hamlets is a classic example, right? Where they were very successful, and Aspire is now in, and it's and I think it's doing a lot of good work for Tower Hamlets, and people are very happy with the council there. But if you look at places like Redbridge, where I live, we find that it's not really representative of the community that it serves and what it's doing. I think there are a lot of allegations of corruption, a lot of allegations of cronyism, and there have been, and this is not just me saying it. I've heard it from many people in this entire area. It really does feel like a council like that needs a bit of a cleanup, and unfortunately, it's our areas, it's our community, it's our our money as a council taxpayer that is being contributed into the pot. And unfortunately, because we're not politically active, don't have a seat at the table. And so, we are, by our own choosing, letting other people decide, what happens in our own backyards. And by us, I don't mean necessarily just the Muslim community. I mean ethnic minorities. I mean, working class people, full stop. If you look through the actual councillors, often they are, not necessarily working class. Often you'll see middle class people in there. Often you'll see people, who are, white. You'll see people who are not necessarily representative of that area. And that's because, they are on a political journey. But I don't think it should be that way. And I think we should change that. Final thing I'd say is that what we mustn't do, though, and this is the key thing, is let that independent or green or local vibe then bleed over into the national spectrum, and where we say, okay, and now because of that, we are going to put up our own independent MP, and we do that absolutely everywhere. Because if we do that absolutely everywhere, as a community, maybe we'll get 10, maybe we'll get 20, but that's neither here nor there, really. And also we've now really nailed our colours to the mast, where we're saying that we are not part of the mainstream discourse with the mainstream parties, and I don't think that's particularly sensible. It doesn't really achieve any political goals, in my view.
I mean, I do agree with that, but it also depends on how the next 5 years plays out, I suppose, because and this would have to be a question that I put back to you. What are the ways we can force Labour to, outside of this, every 5 years elections, and throwing it all out, pulling out the big guns and saying we're not voting for you, we're dropping you as a party, and then in the next 5 years possibly facing the threat of conservatives and reform if they're aligned in any way. Before we pull out the big guns, before we're in a position where we have to, what are the ways we can lobby, we can work with, we can engage with the Labour Party to listen to us and to adhere to the concerns of Muslim voters? Because when it comes down to it, and I've said this to people before, it's kind of a bit of a mantra, sure, we might not align with the left entirely on many different policies, potentially social policies, even economic policies, depending on where we come from. But where we will align with them every single time is they do not support Muslims dying en masse. That's what it always comes down to. When Muslims are dying and when Islamophobia is being used, Islamophobic rhetoric is often being used as a justification for why Muslims should die, the left is in our corner, and that's who we have to fight with, and that's why we find ourselves in left-wing alliances a lot of the time, even though we might not agree with them across the board. And that's what's happened with Gaza, as it turns out. So how do we play the next 5 years? How do we get the Labour Party to engage with us, all parties, even the Conservative Party, to engage with us and to listen to Muslim voters so that we're in and not forced to go all out and fight?
Yeah, so I'll share with you my theory of political change in a second, but I want to frame the political parties in the form of animals. Okay. So let's say you've got a really large working dog Alsatian, and this is the Labour Party and the Conservative Party. They're not necessarily, they're not necessarily cuddly, and you're not instinctively, attracted to them. And then you've got your really cuddly teddy bear poodle type thing, and this is the Independents, or this is the Greens, and naturally, you have that affinity to them, and you might support them. But ultimately, if you get them in, they're still a little poodle. And what is actually better is to work with the Alsatian, because the Alsatian will always get in.
Yeah.
That's just the nature of the beast. But if the Alsatian gets in, what you need to do is have a collar around the Alsatian and have ways to influence the Alsatian in a particular direction. And so, the Labour Party and the Tory Party, I find the most helpful way of thinking about them is that they are blank slates. They are literally white pieces of paper that are up for negotiation. And the way that you influence them is, in my view, a few different things. The first is votes. Actually target their seats, and that's what the Muslim vote was all about. It hadn't historically been done. It's very powerful. Second is money. Money really speaks. The third is friends. Who are your politicians actually friends with? Are you in those same circles or not? And there are some Muslims who are in those circles, right? And they have a particular voice. And joining political parties is a key way of making those friends. The media has a massive role to play in this as well. And then I would say ideas, and that is things like think tanks in particular, and NGOs and charities. In that marketplace of ideas, which is where these politicians pick things from.
Yeah.
So, so in between elections, what we actually need to do as a community is upskill in each of these areas, and we're actually really weak in each of these areas. We're not very strong with the whole think tank, charity, idea space. We're not, the Tony Blair Foundation or Tony Blair Institute, whatever it's called, they have a huge amount of funding, and they've got policies ready for absolutely everything that you can think of.
Yeah.
And not all of them are necessarily bad, but many of them are not necessarily good, particularly when it comes to foreign policy. But they are the ones who are ready to serve into 10 Downing Street. They're also friends, right, with the key people in power, and they're also, their representatives or people who are sympathetic to them are in the media and in the right places to be able to influence the discourse.
Yeah.
And also they've sponsored various people within political parties on both sides. So when you combine all of those things together, I don't think it's as clear cut as, this is what the Labour Party want and that's what they will do. The Labour Party and politicians, they are weather vanes. They swing with the wind. There are very few politicians who actually are signposts. Someone like Margaret Thatcher or Jeremy Corbyn, or who was the he passed away, Tony Benn. Tony Benn was another one, right? Another signpost.
Yeah.
But actually, most politicians today are there for negotiation.
Yeah.
And you see that with how pro-Palestine some of these Labour MPs were, and how they've completely gone the other direction. and our emotive response to that is we don't like that and we're never going to support them. But actually, we need to realize this is just the nature of the beast. They are the Alsatian, and yeah, the Alsatian has been attracted by this bone over here, but the way to deal with the Alsatian is not to say we're going to back the poodle and we're going to, the poodle's going to win against the Alsatian. The way to deal with the Alsatian is to say, look, here's a stick, here's a bone over here, so come back over here, and here's a stick as well. If you don't, then, we can vote you out.
Yeah.
So you need to have that carrot and a stick. So I think it's much more complicated in terms, when we think about what you need to do to create political change. It's much more complicated, and we need to work on all of these different areas. TMV alone is absolutely nowhere near the answer on its own. And there's so much more work to be done by everyone.
Do you think that's a role that can be absorbed by TMV? Can TMV be this, political think tank hub, as well as, a machine that encourages, for example, participation in political parties, getting people inside political parties and voting within them, depending on, where their ideas align and stuff like that. Is that a vision of something TMV could become, a sort of hub or a place that Muslims can come to for various types of political engagement, even outside of elections? Do you envision that to be part of the goal, or do you think TMV is focused on electoral cycles and everything in between taken on by various Muslim organizations?
So I think the value of TMV is around campaigning, and I think that's what it should try and hone itself on and focus on. And the reality is that why would you put out policy papers? Because you want people to read them, engage with them, and potentially implement them.
Yeah.
But I don't think the TMV is, because it's the more spiky end of this 5-6 pronged approach of political change. I think that if reform came out with policies, would the Labour government engage with them? Absolutely not.
Yeah.
So TMV as a campaigning body, I don't think it's rightly placed to be able to do all this other stuff. And I don't think it should waste its time doing that.
Okay.
I think what it should do is coordinate, though, very closely with everyone across the spectrum, and make sure that the asks that are being put to the government and being put to the Tory party, or whoever it might be, are aligned, within the community. And so the value of TMV as providing that stick in this equation is actually helpful, because the people who are providing the carrot are actually, coordinated. And so the direction being set is correct, because otherwise you've got a stick that's hitting this way, the Alsatian's heading over there, but then there's a carrot that's going, over here.
Yeah.
And then it's like, what? And so that the coordination, I think, is really important.
Okay, understood. Now, talking about political engagement from within the Muslim community. Now, the core of what we're mentioning here, and what we're talking about here, and the brilliant strategies that you've spoken about, the ways that we can engage with politics, are reliant on one thing, and that is Muslim communities actually being engaged. Now, within Muslim communities themselves, you've got a number of different ideas and ideologies competing, right? And you have some people who are staunchly anti-politics, whether that's based on some kind of understanding of faith itself, or an ideological thing, how they view nation states and nation state frameworks, and how they want to operate within them, or how they believe Muslims should operate within them, the ideological implications and the theological implications of engaging with the state, and so on. Where do you think the role, and you've done Alamiya yourself and so on, where do you think the role of Muslim scholarship falls into all of this, into this framework of getting a Muslim community to be politically successful? Because there are ideological forces within that are either anti-engagement or anti-successful engagement in some instances when it comes to politics. So how do you think TMV or the Muslim community as a whole should navigate what sometimes appears to be a minefield of ideas?
Yeah, I think that it's always hard to engage people on politics full stop. The turnout is normally around 60 odd percent, I think 66% this time round, which means that 33% or 35% of people didn't actually vote, that
True.
did not care enough about what was going on. And the Muslim community turnout, I think, was like 55%. So it's even less. And I think that needs cut through in terms of interesting, relevant, and slightly subversive campaigns and policies that people can get behind, that actually people are like, this is one thing that I really care about, and then that policy person that's campaigner leads it to the end, and they achieve it. And that shows that actually, politics can work. So I've been involved in some things, the alternative student finance campaign, plus student loans, and then Islamic pensions, and campaigning around that, and driving that change in both cases, alhamdulillah, quite successfully, so that it's actually stuff is happening around it, government is implementing it. So I think that's the way that you get cut through with a community between elections, because this is something tangible that they can get their mind behind, and the people can get back behind it. I think the issue around people saying, well, look, we don't really want to be political, this isn't Islamic in some way, shape or form. I think that's an education piece that we just need to engage with as a community, and I think that's the role that scholars can play. And I think they played it very well in this last election. A number of major scholars and very prominent scholars got behind and said, look, we need to be voting, we need to be politically active, and many of them actually were very supportive of the Muslim vote as well, which I thought was brilliant. And if we look in the Quran, the story of Yusuf alayhi salam, where he said, قَالَ جَعَلْنِي عَلَى خَزَائِنِ الْأَرْضِ. He asked to be put into a position of power and to effectively become a leader or a ruler or a minister that would distribute the grain and the foodstuffs. And was he taking part in the political structure that was not Islamic, and therefore he was doing something un-Islamic? I mean, that's just a bizarre claim to make, right? So,
and what is an Islamic political structure anyways?
Exactly. Exactly. So and there's, of course, there's so many arguments around it. I mean, even if you disagree, there's so much of politics is about deciding where HS2 is going to go, and where climate policy is how that's going to play out, or the transport infrastructure, or the economic policy. And this is just stuff that affects us, right? Yeah. And so and there's nothing Islamic or un-Islamic about which side of the road we should drive on. It's just something that needs coordination, and it's better for us to be contributing to that debate than not.
Than not have a say in it whatsoever. I think that's a lot of what it comes down to. I think the debate that exists is around the framework itself and the implications of that. Okay, so I think we're getting close to having to wrap up. Is there anything else? Sorry, is there anything else you just wanted to add yourself? Any final remarks you wanted to?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that for me, what got us here won't get us where we need to be.
Yeah.
And this is, in my head, a 5-election game plan that as a community, or a journey that as a community we need to go on. Sorry.
Nice.
And the first step of that was really encapsulated in the statement, the Muslim vote matters. We are going to be united and coordinated, and if you don't listen to us, we'll vote in someone else.
Yeah.
But I think as we go forward over the next few elections, we need to be, it shouldn't be about, this is us as a community and, look after us and, we're upset, blah, blah, blah. It should be much more about, we're a faith tradition that really cares about the society that we live in, and we want to contribute to that.
Yeah.
And that's an education internally within the community that actually we need to be doing even more work, on food banks, outreach, getting involved in civic society more so than we have been. I think there's some shining examples, but there's a lot more that can be done. And I think it's taking the community on that journey as well, because once you start doing that, then naturally, there arises from amongst them people who are good leaders, the kind of people that you would actually vote for and, you would be happy to get behind. So there needs to be much more outward-facing stuff. And then I think the second aspect of it is that we need to be now engaging the suffragist end of the spectrum, the think tanks, the academics, the businesses, the genteel folk. They need to make sure that they're actually now kicking into action and doing their bit for the community in driving ideas and thoughts forward that perhaps they historically weren't doing. And then you just go through these cycles. And it might be that, I think that the next cycle in my head, it will be a little bit about showing the Labour Party and the Tory Party that actually we probably will end up backing a number of, I think, as a community, a number of those individuals. And in my view, I think, the TMV, where it backed some Labour MPs and then ultimately didn't back some Labour MPs, I think that was a misstep. I think it was badly handled. And I think in the future, there should be no issues with if there's a good Labour MP or a Tory MP that's good for us.
Wasn't that a statement in and of itself anyways? Backing and then unbacking. Not backing was just a clear statement that, well, it was because of your stance on Gaza. But the initial backing demonstrated that the belief or the idea was that they were good candidates that the Muslim community should stand behind. That can't be undone. Yeah, ultimately.
I think so. I think so. I mean, there's two ways of looking at it. One is I think that was a great signal for lots of people in those constituencies that, we should actually be supporting them. And TMV didn't oppose any of them, right? So, and pretty much all of them. And they
all won.
They all won. Yeah, they literally all won. And so, so I think, this is, I think, the phase where, we go from the terrible teens into maybe like late teens where you're thinking a little bit more strategically, and as a community we're growing up as well. And then what happens next, we will actually need to change again. This is just the nature of the political beast. And I think that's what we sometimes struggle with as a community, because we like things to be like, all right, this is it, we're just going to stick to it and that's what we're going to do. But that's not how politics works.
No, absolutely. And I completely agree that the massive significance of TMV is in demonstrating that the Muslim vote matters and that it can be done, that a political shift can be achieved through the Muslim vote and through Muslim political engagement. So we should not be ignored, and how that then can go forward and how that work can be taken forward is now in the hands of the Muslim community, TMV, various Muslim organisations. And so the plea and the idea would be now for political parties to engage with us. I think that's the next call. Do you think, right?
Yeah, I won't frame it as a plea. I would just say that, guys, this is the obvious strategic step that you need to take. If you don't, it's going to be an absolute car crash in 2020. Well, it will be 2028, 29.
2029. 5 years.
Because of all of the reasons we discussed earlier. And for us as a community, I would encourage people to join all parties. Lib Dems, Independents, Greens, Labour, even Conservatives. Perhaps, I don't know about Reform, but I would definitely say, Conservatives need to be shown some love. And I know it sounds crazy given that they're having a bit of a fisticuff on who can be the most racist at the moment. But they will be back in power in 5, if not 10 years' time. If you look at the tapestry of political history in the UK, they've been the party that's mainly been in power. So they will be back. And this is our chance as a community to actually say that, rather than we are really the Labour community, no, we can actually engage with the Tory party as well and help hopefully change it from the inside, right, towards something that's perhaps a little bit less racist, into something that we would be potentially happy, at least some of us might be happy to vote for.
Yeah, it's about creating viable models everywhere, because the political landscape might not play out in your favour. And we discovered actually during the election that we did need people inside political parties supporting us. Now, when we took a stance that we were not going to be with Labour, what would have been great if there were Muslims, or enough Muslims, or a very strong Muslim voice inside the Green Party, because then Muslim, the interests that TMV was trying to represent would have also been represented with a political party. So actually, I completely agree with that notion. Muslims should be engaging with all political parties across the spectrum, both on a level where they are politically active individuals with ideas, but also strategically, because it's sound strategy to be in at every level. Anyways, we're going to have to come to bring this podcast to an end. Thank you very, very much, Ibrahim, for coming, for giving us your time, your ideas. It's been brilliant. It's been a pleasure speaking with you, and hopefully we'll have you on here soon.
Definitely, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum.
Salam.